Este, ya, ok. Está esperando a Vania, pero bueno. Ah, ok, ok. Sí, sí. Sí. Este, hello. Sí, ya estamos. Shall we retake the the whole discussion? So I think we didn't talk enough about the contribution of Dr. Gasquez, and I think he made up a few points regarding the issue of adaptation and mitigation, and he talked about an interesting area of conflict between energy justice and climate justice, which is very much in the literature, right? Because the problem with Africa is that it doesn't have at the moment energy justice. In a sense, the per capita consumption of energy, of commercial energy, is very low. But the actual consumption of energy in Africa might not be as low as we might imagine if we take into account sources of biomass, right? So, but anyway, in terms of commercial energy, they don't have justice. There is no energy justice, right? And so I think that was one of the points that Dr. Gasquez made about the sustainable development goals in relation to climate justice and energy justice. And if I can just add one point regarding this, we have a problem because within the Kyoto Agreement, within the climate change debate, wealthy countries are asking Latin America and Africa to contribute to the mitigation of carbon emissions, to the reduction of carbon emissions, right? But as you were saying, I think you mentioned that, Dr. Ivanova, and the fact that they're not responsible for those emissions. Africa and Latin America is not responsible. Yet they're being asked, well, yeah, I mean, Mexico, we could say they are partially responsible, but historically is basically the leading industrial economies, you know, the French, the Japanese, the Americans, the Europeans. They historically, they are the ones who have produced most of the emissions. So they have a greater moral responsibility to mitigate. And it's a bit unfair to ask African countries to mitigate. So you know, that was one area of concern for me. You know, every time people talk about mitigation, of course, we all have to mitigate. We all have to reduce emissions. But I think there is this conflict, and there are different visions. And I think Africa is in a very vulnerable position, and they're not able to mitigate to the same extent, right? Because they don't have the financial means to do it. So that was one area that you mentioned, but I'm just expanding on that point. And you also mentioned the high-speed rail program in Africa, right? And I don't know if you think the high-speed rail program has some negative effects for the local economy or for the regional economy. So I don't know if you could just expand on that, or do you think it's just a resource exploitation project? It's basically not benefiting the local economies and is benefiting the foreign investor.
Well, first of all, I think that maybe Aduna can respond better to that question. These projects what is evident about these projects is that they are going to be very energy demanding. So if Africa is not allowed to use, as I was saying during my presentation, natural gas as a transitional fuel, they're not going to be able to get those levels of development that would in turn allow them to fight climate change adequately. So I don't know. I just cited these two mega projects. I don't know them in depth. So maybe Aduna can, as because the high-speed railway is a project of that comes from Agenda 2030, from Sustainable Development Goals. So I don't know what is the role that the African free trade area is going to play in this project in particular. I would also like to try to answer the question Oscar was posing to Dr. Ivanova. Like we're discussing we're comparing the development regime, the Western development regime, international cooperation to development with the Chinese model. If we were able to speak about post conditionality, I think that I don't know in depth the two development models, but I think that the difference. I was attending a seminar with Patrick Carmody online with the pandemics, and the discussion was around the fact that the Western help, the Western development model, was more based on military coercion than the Chinese one. And I don't know if it's really like that, but in the particular example of the European Union development policy, for example, for fighting against migration coming from Africa, it's very present, this military element. I don't know if you remember, but our mentor, the late Mbuyi, who passed away a couple of months ago, I don't know. He was, I don't know if it's still true now with the Ukraine-Russia war going on, but he talked a lot about the Sahel, this region of Africa, of being the most militarized zone of the planet. So why, if this zone gets too much importance in terms of military display in global terms, why it is why it is not known, why it is not more studied, why? And I think it's part of this epistemic predation. No, Africa has been subject to capitalist predation since the 15th century, but it has also been subject to an epistemic predation that pushes African realities and phenomena to the outer limits of theory and policy. So I think I like to work more in this representational domain of what means the display of the aid regime, of the Western aid regime or the Chinese aid regime, and I think that both are not interested in developing or presenting another vision of African societies and local concerns. So that's why I accepted to participate in this panel, because I don't know, Aduna and Hector, they do economics. Dr. Ivanova, I think also, or she's more expert in climate change subjects, but I try to think of how we can relate this specific vulnerability of Africa in these conditions of climate change with this marginalization that takes place in academic circles.
Thank you. Yeah, one last issue was you mentioned the role of mineral assets in Africa, and you were saying there are strategic minerals for manufacturing renewable energy technologies. So I don't know if you can comment on that, or maybe it's
the same story about railway. It was like info that I got that helped me to build the argument, but it was like presented in like an opportunity if sustainable development policies were achieved, Africa may play an important role due to its unique concentration of these minerals, but the model should be changed. Blue development, green development, mineral development. I don't totally agree that that's going to be beneficial. I think they should envision another economic system that works for their benefit. I think they should work more on a model, of an economic model that is more sensitive of local realities and that not imposed from any Western or other power.
Well, I would like to comment about the mitigation part you mentioned. Yeah. So you were asking if all the countries must mitigate. Yes, until 2010, it was precisely a Chinese position that the developed countries must respond for their historical contribution to the greenhouse gases emissions at the atmosphere. And they were obligating that the developing countries must not perform mitigation actions. However, in 2014, was launched the fifth assessment report of the IPCC. And in this report was stated that the most vulnerable parts of the earth are the developing countries, including China. The most vulnerability of China was when the glaciers were melting, then inundations were occurring in China, and then droughts. And Chinese population is depending on rice for its diet. So it would be a great, great disaster for China if the climate change was continuing unstopped. So China, after this, was the first country that was promoting the mitigation policies. We can remember also, together with the adaptation, but also the mitigation from all the countries. We can remember that the Kyoto Protocol was determining responsibilities to diminish the emissions of the greenhouse gases only for the developed countries. And we can say that the compromises that the countries got in this Kyoto Protocol was accomplished only by the European countries. Yes? Neither the United States, neither Australia, neither Japan accomplished with these compromises. And this led also to internal controversies between the European countries, because some of the recently involved countries, as from the ex-socialist bloc, they were saying that they also have many problems from development. And if the other countries, the other developing countries are not mitigating, they must not make this too. But they were obliged by the European Union policies. So the Paris Agreement is involving all the countries of the world to mitigate the greenhouse emissions. But it is made by nationally determined contributions. Each country is stating for the Convention on Climate Change how much can they diminish the emissions. It is by the possibilities of their economy, but all the compromises of the developing countries are linked to international help, financial help. So they are stating we can diminish our emissions by this percentage, but for this we must receive for the Green Development Fund or other funds that are used for the climate action, such and such quantity of money. So the historical responsibility is recognized by this financial aid to the developing countries. See, but it is not correct to say that the developing countries must not mitigate. We see that China is developing countries by the United Nations definition is the first emitter of the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. So it is completely wrong that they must not mitigate. And the other thing that I stated also, they must build the new infrastructure on carbon low basis, because they don't have so much accumulated infrastructure that is highly emitting as the developed countries. So for the developing countries to build the new infrastructure with environmental criteria and climate criteria is much easier with the proper financing, of course. Yeah, and these are the one hand of the mitigation, but the other side is that we have carbon sequestration from the atmosphere, and these are the woods, these are the wetlands, and so on. And the developing countries can contribute to the mitigation by protecting their woods, by protecting their wetlands. Of course, they can make them the sustainable development of these assets for their societies, for their communities, but protecting the woods and the wetlands, it is a very important contribution to greenhouse gases mitigation. And this is stated also in nationally determined contributions for the Convention of the Climate Change. Another thing that must be highlighted, that all the nationally determined contributions, if we make the sum now, are allowing to stop the increase of the temperature to 2 centigrades. The aim of 1.5 centigrades that was launched by the small developing island states is practically very, very hard to achieve. So some countries are revising their nationally determined contributions, also at the light of the financing that is available, to go some closer to 1.5 centigrades. That is.
I just want to add a little bit on the infrastructure railway issue. And I don't know that much about the environmental impact, but I can give you one example. In Ethiopia, when the Chinese were building railway in the city, so the government is aware of the construction style of the Chinese construction companies. So what they did was they gave the contract to the Chinese company, but on the side, they put a Swedish company as an inspector. So at one point, I remember the inspectors came, looked at the construction, and they said there's something wrong, we have to redo the whole thing. Part of it. So the Chinese agreed to demolish and did part of it again. That's one. But more importantly, what I know about the infrastructure, of course, all African countries want infrastructure. This environment headache is like, okay, what do we do with it? We want the infrastructure, how do you build it? But their major issue, what they look at it, is the financial viability of the infrastructure. Can we get money out of this infrastructure? Can you get money out of, or a return out of this railway? Some of the examples we know, we're talking during the break, how some of the infrastructures are really not financially viable in terms of generating enough revenue to pay back the loans. Of course, it takes time. You don't get your money the next year or after 2 years. It takes 10, 20 years to get a return. But African countries have other obligations that they have to borrow for almost everything. So the financial viability, putting China and Africa head on, because some of the projects are not generating enough revenue for the countries to pay back the loan on time. So every time there is a request to, can you revise a repayment system? Can you give us some cancellations? Always there is this negotiation. So maybe in the future, they don't have to rush to just build an infrastructure because they want it unless there is a use for it. So one expressway they built in Kenya, the projection of how many cars go on there were way too high than the reality. Not that many cars drive on that railway, on that expressway. So they could not generate enough toll money to pay back the loan. So the financial viability is another headache on top of the environment. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I just get the feeling that maybe some of those infrastructure programs are somehow subsidized by the Chinese government. They know they cannot recover that investment, but they know there will be other benefits related to that, because probably you have to import their equipment as well, right?
Yeah, part of that is one of the agreement is Chinese government, when they sign the agreement, they say the raw material to build this road or this railway has to come from China.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot get the raw material from China. Maybe steel, maybe some other raw materials. That's one condition. The other condition it slipped my mind right now is that the Chinese put on in terms of generating revenue is they have to show the country after running the system for 1 or 2 years. For example, the railway, they manage it for 2 years. They want to show, okay, it is running now, it is working. After 2 years, you take over, and then you pay back. So the management style of the Chinese and the locals are different. So as soon as the locals take over, the system is not running the same way. Maybe the people are not that expert to run the railway, but for some reason it's not generating enough revenue in that sense. Oh, I remember now. When they give loan to infrastructure construction, there is what they call the concessional loan. So that's the subsidy part. The China say, oh, I'll give you a very low interest rate to build this. Even that low interest rate is too high because the revenue coming out of these railways are not enough even to pay that. Yeah, of course it says subsidized. I don't know how much low, but it is subsidized. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, if you look at the history of Africa with the French and the Americans, as far as I know, they've offered commercial loans, but very expensive loans for infrastructure, if at all, right? Because they're really behind with, I mean, even the European Union is not really offering favorable infrastructure financing mechanisms, right? So, and then suddenly China turns up and they say, well, look, we'll do it for you. We'll deliver the whole package of infrastructure for you. And you don't have to pay a lot.
Yeah.
And so countries with weak institutions can easily fall into that trap, right? I mean, that's one story. Another story is that there are benefits, even though you have all these problems of huge debt and whatever, maybe there are also some benefits because at least you will have some infrastructure that you didn't have before. And there must be some local benefits. Maybe, the first round effects of the infrastructure will not be so beneficial, but maybe the second round, the third round effects will create some employment. But, we would have to look at the specific case studies of port expansion, port modernization, so, but anyway, yeah, that was my comment. Any other comments? Oscar, yeah. Thank you.
I'm sorry I missed Dr. Lemmy's presentation, but from what I've heard and from what we're discussing, from my experience, the Europeans have ODAs, and they have done very little, and ODAs ended up more in European hands than anything else. And the US, and the US, what it had behind it, policies was security. Now, China, from the work I did for the paper I will present later on, apparently arrives in the country with a package. It doesn't respond to the demand of the state. It goes to the state and says, here I have this project for you, and this is a good idea because we're going to do A, B, and C with this project, which is linked to D, E, and F. And that articulates direct investment with loans. I only looked at direct investment, is what I'm going to present. But when you link it with loans, as I was hearing from Ivanova, I have the impression they are chain, encadenados. And so it's not that the government of country, whatever, has a project and borrows the money for the project. It's more like the Chinese government has an idea, and it's basically at the resources, and puts the money there, and it doesn't care if it uses money, because the point is not in the infrastructure. The point is in what they're getting from.
Yeah, that's an interesting. Just that. Yeah, exactly. I've read, articles in The Economist about this, Chinese infrastructure financing in Africa, and it's a fascinating area, but I think to some extent the newspaper articles that I've read are a little bit biased because they're very critical of China, and I think I do agree with some of the points raised in those articles, but I'm a transport economist myself, so we always talk about infrastructure and economic development, and there's always controversy in any country when you have economic growth. Is it going to create local economic development or not? And that also depends on complementary policies and institutions surrounding the investment in infrastructure. So obviously in Africa, like in Latin America, you don't have enough institutional strength. The quality of institution is relatively poor. So you cannot exploit the economies of scale offered by the new infrastructure project. So we can't blame everything on the foreign investor. In other words, you also need to have your own capacity building. You also need to have your own local institutions that know how to benefit from those infrastructures. So, and I think that's on the optimistic side. I think that's one of the challenges of countries that have the new ports that you mentioned in Djibouti and different parts of Africa. But yeah, the latest I heard was that African countries are now, several of them are unable to pay back some of the infrastructure programs in the last 2 years. And so they may lose control of these infrastructure projects and the foreign investor can take control. But as you were mentioning, the port, there was a port that I think it was in Madagascar. Yeah, I can't remember, or in Sri Lanka. I think there was a famous case in Sri Lanka, which was in a New York Times. I read, and the Sri Lankan government lost control of the port because they couldn't pay back the interest. But
The Chinese firm kept it.
Military, you know, people are saying that basically it was a military objective, a strategic objective, because they want to have a foothold on that part of Africa. So, so there's more than just, you know, business, basically, as you know, there's geopolitics.
What you said earlier about the China coming with a plan already is partly because there are several examples in African countries. China wants something from that country. For example, Angola, they know there is a lot of oil reserve. So China said, whatever you want me to build, tell me, I'm gonna build it. It's $10 billion worth. So hospital, high school, highway, I'll build. Just give me access to the oil.
Exactly.
So it's for China, it's a win-win. I will dig the oil, I'll give you the infrastructure. I don't care whether the infrastructure is good or bad for you, I'll build it. And that's what China said first when they come to any country. Number one, I'm here for business. Number two, no intervention. You can be a dictator, I don't care. You can be killing your people, I don't care. There are these two conditions. Yeah, of course, there is the Taiwan case. You don't want to mess with Taiwan. As long as you fulfill that, we have a deal, right? So you are right. China comes with this because the other thing is the African governments say they don't have their own proposal. Why don't they show it to China? Okay, I want to build this. Because most of the governments in power, they have only short-term plans because they are not sure how long they stay in power. So they don't want to make, okay, 10 years, we need this highway, it will take 10 years to finish. No, like it's a short-term plan, right? So China said, I'm going to build this, it will stay for 10 years, it's stay for 20 years. It has to come from China in some cases because the government themselves, they are not sure they want to do it. Like, no, I have other businesses here to benefit my people or my group in a state of thinking. Of course, there is Paul Kagame, which is a different story. He wants to run forever. That's a different story. But yeah, you are right in terms of China writing their proposals.
No, I agree with you, and I think that the corruption in the African governments is very high too. In this sense, they accept what China is proposing, and China wants to have control over the natural resources. This is the main objective, and the infrastructure, the main objective of the portuary infrastructure, for example, is how to transport these natural resources to China or to other countries where China will sell them. So it is complete, you are completely right, but I agree also with Dr. Bonilla, who says that the national governments could have more vision about the development of their own countries. And if already an infrastructure object is accepted, they could see how to link it to the internal development of the country. But the short term of this government, I think it is an impediment to make this. And the other component is that the local societies are not involved in the decision on the national development. The local societies, the people, the NGOs, and so on, they have a very, very low role in Africa. And this is, I think, another impediment for the national development of these countries.
So is there any other questions? Are there any comments? Don't be shy. Yeah, it's very interesting. To be honest, I work on transport infrastructure and economic growth or local economic growth. So that's why I'm interested in this topic, you know. And I think there could be lessons for Africa from India or from Mexico. You could draw some parallels and see what was done in other countries to exploit the economies of scale out of these projects. And but I think that's, if there are no questions, I think we close it. Thank you to all the panelists. Thank you. Sí, sí está interesante.
So is this with economic in Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean, inflation and poverty. This here, I don't know if Andres arrived. Oscar, Clarty, and Wendy Bravo.
Vamos a parar aquí.
Un inicio.
Sí,
¿sí? Uh, okay, welcome everyone. Firstly, I would like to thank Dr. Alicia Giron for inviting me to moderate this panel number 5, which will focus on economic issues in Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean, with a particular focus on inflation and poverty. I would like to introduce all speakers of this panel, and I would like to start introducing Dr. Alicia Giron, who is an emeritus researcher of the Institute of Economic Research here at UNAM. Well, she has a long trajectory, but just briefly speaking, I will skip the rest. I would like to also introduce Speaker Andres Arauz. I don't know where. Yeah, hasn't arrived yet. Okay. Andres Arauz was Minister of Science, Deputy Minister of Planning and Advisory. I'm sorry, an advisor on financial policy in Ecuador. He holds a PhD in financial economics from here UNAM as well. And he is also a professor in economics and finance. I will do this briefly. I'm sorry. I would also like to introduce Oscar Ugarteche, who is tenured researcher at the Institute of Economic Research and is member of CONACYT's National System of Researchers. He earned the Prize of Economic Research in 2021. And he's published more than 30 books, more than 100 articles, and 49 book chapters. Thank you. Cesar Duarte is also a researcher at the Institute of Economic Research. He's member of National System of Researchers, CONACYT, and he holds a PhD in Contemporary History from Luis Mora Research Institute. His research has focused on discussions on monetary theory and financial and monetary economics. And finally, I would like to introduce Gwendolyn Bravo, who is a doctor in economics, also from the National University here in UNAM. His research focuses on financial systems, economic policy, banking systems, and financial and economic development. Thank you, all of you, and I would like to start this presentation with Dr. Alicia Giron. Okay. Thank you. Thanks so much, and thank you for your attendance today.
Okay, well, first of all, thank you very much. Welcome to the University Program Studies on Asia and Africa. We're very happy that all our colleagues are here, especially trying to understand what is Africa and how Africa is in the global in a global place. So I'm going to try to work. I hope to work here. Okay. Well, this is the panel 4, Economic Issues in Africa and Latin America and the Caribbean, Inflation and Poverty. And I would like to, the title of our contribution is Financialization and Economic Development in Africa. Is it African century? But the thing is that this is part of a long research. We have been working Africa since the PUEA has began. When the PUEA began, we wanted to try to see what is the relation between Asia and Africa. And one of the principal relations is, of course, China in the contemporary world, but also before. So, and we want to, of course, we came from the financial issues, from the economic and finance research. So how I organized this conference, I was just trying to, I made it very early in the morning because we have a lot of charts, and I tried to organize this because one of the principal things that we want to talk is how financialization works in this continent, and also the relation with the money manager capitalism in China. So the objective is, well, is the development of the region's financial fragility and economic instability process in an environment. This is very important for, I just discovered that the absence of the United States arrived other agents, Turkey, the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Russia. Well, we have yesterday we talked about Adriana Franco talked the importance of Russia in Africa, and the growing presence of China, how it has emerged. And the other thing is that is very important, the environment, which is we have a lot of high inflation, we have high indebtedness, and also the rising interest rates in a very short term. And besides that, the lack is very important, the lack of full employment policy, given the burden of servicing external debt, and the need to import food, fertilizers, and food. This situation prioritizes institutional investors who play a determining role in the economic development of the Africa region. So this is more or less the hypothesis that we want to talk. So the big funding is, well, I took this title in the report that was presented last week in the spring meetings of the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. There's a report of the Sub-Saharan region, and it is titled "The Big Funding Squeeze." So they are very aware because there are not capital flows to Africa. But even though I am going to explain how these flows have been before the pandemic. So first of all, this is just a big panorama that we have already done. Professor Abdulbi has already tell us the declining, for example, for this year, there's a severe decline of GDP. It will be for next year 3.6. Also, the problems in the external market. It is reducing the investment. The other problem is that tight monetary policy, who is prioritizing the inflation across the region, the increase of the cost of living. The other is the strength of the dollar. And there are also 21 arrangements between different countries. The problem of the health and education infrastructure, the skilled educated workers, the restructuring of the debt, the climate change, and at least IMF hasn't given enough money for Africa. So I'm just taking this one because we have to criticize the statement that they put in this one. I'm going to read it. They say that there are 4 policy priorities can help address the macroeconomic imbalance in the context of current financing constraints. First, they said, as always, consolidating public finance and stretching public financial management amid difficult funding conditions. This will really, on continued revenue mobilization, better management of fiscal risks, and more proactive debt management. International assistance remain also critical to alleviating government's financing constraints for countries that require debt reprofiling or restructuring. A well-functioning debt resolution framework is vital to creating a fiscal space. As we read it, you can see that this is the principal aim of the IMF is the austerity programs. So they don't have any help in the restructuring of the debt. They aren't canceling debts, especially they say that in the G20, they have been canceling debts, especially the ones that came from China, but they don't have a strong policy for these countries. Then they want to contain inflation. Of course, we know that monetary policy should be steered cautiously until inflation is firmly on a downward trajectory and projected to return to the central bank's target rates. This is just crazy. If you see the principal remarks of Kristalina Georgieva last week, she pointed that we have to resolve the problem of the global economy, decreasing
inflation. If we have, or we came from another economic perspective, that's just, it isn't enough to reconstruct. We have forget a little bit about inflation, and we have to improve the budget instead of paying the external debt. The third one is allowing the exchange rate to adjust while mitigating the adverse effects on the economy, including the rise in inflation and debt due to the currency depreciations. And the last one is ensuring that important efforts to fund and address climate change do not crowd out basic needs like health and education, and climate finance provided by the international community must come on the top of the current aid flows. Of course, we have already said in the papers that you have presented how it is very important, the just transition, but even though how it will be very important, how the institutional investors will put this money for climate change in these countries. So, okay, so I will go quick. This is just, this chart is just before the pandemic. As you can see, if you see that tendency, well, only before 2021, then the GDP decreased 1.99 and then goes up with all the money that they got. But if you see, it's that for next year, it will decrease the GDP. Then this is the chart that one of you presented. These are the charts, and it is very important. I told this one yesterday in the inauguration, that, for example, there are countries like, I don't say, like Niger, that it for the future will be 13.0. But for example, Guinea, Equatorial Guinea will be a decrease of 8.2. So it's it isn't there isn't a homogenization of the GDP. It depends in each country how it is, how is this indicator. Well, money management capital. What is money management? Well, money management capitalism is a definition that Minsky make to understand especially the great corporations. And it is, of course, based in the Hilferding definition of capital financiero. Also, Luxembourg works in it, and also Keynes with rentier capitalism. And of course, Minsky used money management capitalism to understand what's going behind all this restructuration of the African economy. There are great corporations, and it is especially the representations of the money management capital. Who are there? Well, I have the data for the Chinese builders in Africa and the Chinese constructors. This is, I took these ones, builders and constructors, because that's the way we have taken the data. But for me, at the end, we can see, I don't see the difference, but I haven't changed at this, maybe at the end of the research, maybe we can have a definition more, more coherent. Okay, well, this for me, this is the most important, and I would like to share with you. This are the 10 principal corporations of China. This is the main Chinese builders in sub-Saharan Africa. Of course, all are from the States, only Simons, but we have, for example, China Railway Construction, and it has the affiliates, China Civil Engineering, Construction, Corriente Resources, Aldesa. And for example, this China Railway Construction is in Djibouti, Ethiopia, Kenya, Rwanda, Tanzania, Zambia, Zimbabwe, Angola, Ghana, Guinea, Mali, Niger, no? And it is especially transportation. They have the amount in Africa is $33 billion dollars, so with $1 billion. And so we are taking these principles, and then we make the research in which countries they are. For example, China Railway Construction Corporations is in transport, logistics, real estate, utilities, metal, and others. And when you go to the projects, you have surprises. For example, in Rabat, it is a building, it is a tower, which is the largest tower in Africa. Sí, la más alta en África. I think, yes, the most, so you understand me. So, and when I go to see how this was in Rabat, in Morocco, which is a reign or is a king. Yes, they make that tower with a joint Moroccan company. And so you can see, for example, the building of the African Union was made also by a Chinese company. So as we see, of course, there are a lot of investment in railways, a lot of investment in ports, but at the same time, they are like, I don't know, like a soft power, no, with these countries. And so we have like this, as I am telling you, this is just the beginning of a research project. And we don't know when we will begin because it is very, 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 there's a lot of information. So this is the builders. And then we have the investors. So the principal is the Industrial and Commercial Bank of China. Principal, it is in South Africa. And then we have the China National Petroleum Corporation. And it has the affiliates is PetroChina. And the affiliates is Kunhun Energy, China Petroleum Engineering, Construction, formerly China Petroleum Pipeline. It is in Niger. The other one is China Petroleum and Chemical, Sinopec. Also with this, for example, Shanghai Petrochemical. So they are like, how say, brazos of this company. The Aluminum Corporation of China. It has China Copper, Shandong, Huay Alloy, Chinalco Rare Earth, and this is in Guinea. China National Offshore Oil, it's in Nigeria. China Noble and Democratic, and Exim State and Democratic, and China Real and China. Well, what is the reality of this company? And this is another part that I haven't made right now, the charts, is that all these companies and these ones, they have institutional investors. Who are the institutional investors? Is institutional investor. Vanguard. Well, Vanguard. Let me think. BlackRock, Vanguard. There are 3 minutes. Well, BlackRock, Vanguard, and the principal institutional investors are in these companies. But at the same time, if you see other companies, these companies also are in Mexican companies, in United corporations, in French corporation, all that. So when Silicon Valley have a little balance, no, a bad balance, well, everybody is afraid, no? Okay, well, this was part of that. And then here I have also how they are. This is only for the principal, how it is. And if you see China Communication Construction is no, it is, ¿cómo está? It's China Communication Construction is almost 30% of the investment in Africa, and then power construction. So this is just a chart to see how they are and the percentage that they are investing. Well, this is the capital inflows to Sub-Saharan Africa. This is not only, is that total, not only, for example, remittance it's very important as the same in Mexico and other Latin American countries. And of course, official development assistance. And then here we have the foreign debt disbursements to African governments. If you see, this is impressive. And we have already said how China has given more than others, more or less than the World Bank has given. There are other multiple lenders, and the IMF, almost 50 billion. And that's, well, to see how they are. So, well, the principal creditors, no, of course, the private sector, the World Bank, the multilateral without the World Bank, Paris Club, and the IMF. It's a synthesis of the charts. Okay. Well, who external debt is owned for the 15 government? This is a 15, there are 15 countries in stress. So I have already finished my time. So, and that's why I organized the conference, because for me, it was very important to show you how these Chinese companies are in Africa, and of course, the importance of China. And the other problem is the debt, all the sectors, the Chinese public and private sector loans. Voy a irme muy rápido. This is the other part of the paper is the commodities, but we have already talked about the commodities. You have already explained, and this is the, well, that is Africa is a commodity continent, and well, we have, and well, I took this. I'm going to read and I finish. This is I took yesterday. I was reading the Financial Times, but I forget to take who wrote it. But it's very important, as David said. It depends what you read. No, so this is for the Financial Times, and it said China's 1 trillion Belt and Road Initiative infrastructure finance program has been hit by spiraling bad loans, with more than 78 billion worth of borrowing turning sour over the past 3 years. Beijing made China the world's largest bilateral creditor. Well, we are, of course it is, but the figures suggest it has become a financial milestone for Beijing and its biggest bank. About 78.5 billion of loans from Chinese institutions to road, railways, port, airports, and other infrastructure around the world were renegotiated or written off between 2020 and the end of March this year, according to figures compiled by New York-based research organization, the Rhodium Group. And this is more than 4 times the 17 billion in renegotiation and write-offs records by Rhodium in the 3 years from 2017 to the end of 2019. And there are no official figures for the total scale of the lending over the past decade, but it is believed to total somewhere in the ballpark of 1 trillion, according to Brad Parks, Executive Director of Data at William and Mary University in the US. Okay, thank you very much. And okay.
Yeah, it's working. Okay, thank you, Dr. Alisa Giron, for the presentation. We will leave questions and answers to the end of all presentations. Now, I would like to introduce the next presentation. Oscar Ugarteche, Dr. Oscar Ugarteche will present the geopolitics of energy matrix change, the role of China in Africa. Thank you so much. And I would like just to remind you that it's 15 minutes, the time you have, and I will be showing the cards when the time is getting over. Thank you.
Good afternoon. ¿Puedes ponerlo en toda la pantalla? Good afternoon. Thank you, Alicia, for the invitation, and thank you all for being here. I normally don't work Africa, I work Latin America, but given that we, with David, have been working the energy matrix change, and I have been looking at the geopolitics of it, when I saw the invitation to look at Africa, I said, well, why not? No, this is when. So, but I had a problem because on the other side, I was also trying to look at the role of Chinese investments in African economic growth to see if there was a relationship or something. because I had been reading what has been presented here. So I said, well, what is happening with the Chinese money in Africa? So I got together with one of my assistants, who's an econometrician, Luis Colin, and he made a little model for 18 countries. We used the data from the Heritage Foundation of Sub-Saharan Africa, plus 4 countries from Northern Africa. And we completed the data with data from UNCTAD, the foreign investment report of 2022, 2010, and 2000. And we completed the series. We have taken 2 approaches. One is to see how foreign investment reaches Africa and the role of the leading foreign investor, which is China. The first thing that struck is that political risk is not a consideration. Normally, and this is one of the things I teach in my course of international finance, credit risk and political risk go hand in hand, and they are the basis for an investment. Now, in Africa, the Chinese do not take either credit risk nor political risk into consideration. So there are other considerations for investment. It has nothing to do with risk. It has to do with the resources they're entering or going after. Now, we reviewed the energy investments, particularly, and we saw that the result was not significant. Now, here we have the speed of growth of investment between 2000 and 2021. This is the stock of Chinese investments in the world. And as you can see, between 2000 and 2021, Chinese investments in the world have increased by 9,297%, which is 15 times larger than EU investments and 30 times larger than US investments in the world. The projection, if the pace is kept of the period between 2010 and 21, the projection is by 2030, the stock of Chinese investment in the world will be roughly of the same size as the EU and the US. Now, in Africa and in the Americas, what we have is 16.4% of Chinese investments in the world are in Africa, 2.9 in Northern Africa, and 13.almost 6 in Sub-Saharan Africa. And in the Americas, between South America, North America, and the USA, what you have is another 20%. So Africa adds up to 16.5%, and the 3 Americas add up to 20.8%. That's the weight. And as you can see, the US weighs 8%, no? The US alone. It's the largest single country where China invests. Now, these are the GDPs of selected countries in Africa. This is the log, the axis is the logs. And what you can see is that the GDP in the purchasing power parity, real terms in 2015 constant dollars, what you can see is that most economies have shrunk, except a couple. Now, the 3 that have a triangle, which is the Democratic Republic of Congo, Algiers, and Sudan, have a positive relationship between Chinese investment and growth, and it is a significant impact. That means it's an over 10% impact on growth. Now that is different from the other 15 countries where it is a positive impact, but it is not significant. For the rest of the countries, it is neither significant nor positive. And here you have the numbers. I'll skip them. Now, according to Western credit rating agencies, the common denominator of all 9 allies countries is that they are high risk. Egypt is the exception. The other 9 countries in the sample of 18 out of 40 do not have enough data for the econometric analysis tried. The implication is that China does not consider political, social, or economic credit ratings and credit risk for its investments. They are based on other considerations. The first 3 countries of the list are significant and positive to GDP growth. These are Congo, Algeria, and Sudan. Based on the latest credit ratings and risk assessments from Standard & Poor's, Moody's, and Fitch Ratings, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Algeria, and Sudan are generally considered high-risk countries with credit ratings indicating a high credit risk or highly speculative credit risk quality. The 3 are oil exporting and have gold. The Democratic Republic of Congo and Sudan have the 2 largest gold reserves in Africa after South Africa. The rest of the countries are analyzed where China's FDAs is positive but not significant. That's Ivory Coast, Ethiopia, Ghana, Angola, Egypt, and Zambia. Overall, the 5 countries are considered to have some level of credit risk, but the severity of the risk varies. Countries with a stable outlook for their credit worthiness are seen as having a better chance of maintaining or improving their credit rating in the future. At the same time, the others could result in a downgrade of the credit rating. Zambia stands out from the other countries because it has a different risk profile, primarily attributed to the current financial distress. All 3 major credit rating agencies have downgraded Zambia's credit rating, and the country is currently in default on some of its financial obligations. This means, and this is my point, that when China enters a foreign investment in a country, given it does not take credit risk into consideration, and these are the credit risk conditions, when they cannot be repaid, that's taken as a matter of fact. They are not investing because the loan is going to be repaid. They are investing because they're going to get the natural resources. In the cases we have seen, it is gold and oil in the 3 cases, and then the 5 next cases. Now, when we look at what energy they're going into, and this I found peculiar, and I liked Dr. Lemmy's comments on this, is take a look at renewables in Africa are 40.7% of the energy investments in Africa. And fossil fuels are another 40.1%. And there is an undefined column. It's called, the column is called something like claro, clear. It's not defined. And that's another 20%. Now, if that column is equally biased, then it'll be roughly 50-50, no? So what we're speaking is that energy, the investments in energy in Africa are of both types, and they're roughly equal. Now, what's the difference? Alternative energy is for domestic consumption. Fossil fuel is for exports. But, and this is where the comment came earlier, and I said, you can export electricity. And that I had not thought, but that's the point. When you have those huge projects in Ethiopia with Egypt, it's a massive project. And I kept wondering, why are they investing so much money in hydroelectricity here for exports, for the electric train, for the ports, for exports? But it's not for exports in general, or like in the World Bank projects where it'll be chained into other activities. It's for the exports related to what they are developing. So what we should have to look at is how the direct investments are linked with the loans, and they supplement each other. Well, here we are again. There are 7 oil exporting countries that concentrate 42% of all investments, and it's 18 concentrate 87% of all energy investments. And it's 13.5 that Africa represents. The other sector that is very important, aside from oil, is minerals, metals. When you do the aggregation of minerals and oil, it is the majority. So here you have the 2 types of energies. And here you have how much is invested in energy in each country. Now so Nigeria, Angola, Egypt, Niger, and Ethiopia concentrate most of the energy investments. And Ethiopia is hydroelectricity for exports. The rest are oil. And what comes below is also oil. So here you have hydroelectricity, Ethiopia, Angola, Cameroon, Zambia, Guinea, Kenya, and Uganda. It would be interesting to see and to study what the hydroelectric projects are about in the other countries. Now that we know what Ethiopia is like, maybe that pattern is repeated in Cameroon, Zambia, Guinea, Kenya, and Uganda. Energy from oil, it's there. The other mineral resources in these oil-rich countries are gold, it's a common denominator. Gas is almost a common denominator. Bauxite, iron ore. In Angola, there are diamonds. There's cobalt, copper in Angola and Egypt, and uranium in 3 countries. So that the investments in the oil-rich countries are looking at not only the oil, they're also looking at the other stuff, where I don't know if they're investing yet, but they're looking at it, it's there. These are the countries it gets gas from: Mozambique, Nigeria, Ghana, Tanzania, Angola, and Zimbabwe. And the alternative energy, which is where they should be concentrating, is 5.4%. And it's in the 6 countries there. The impact on growth is tiny. And what we saw that surprised me is that in some cases, between 2000 and 2004, you had growth. And then when the Chinese investments arrive in 2005, from 2005 to 2021, growth is reduced. That's one set of countries. Another set of countries, you have the reverse. Growth gets accelerated, which seems more logical. And there is a third set of countries where nothing happens. It's neutral, totally neutral. In the other countries, which are not the oil-producing countries, these are the other countries where China has direct investment, the common denominator appears to be gold. That's it, that's everywhere. In every country where China has invested, in energy or not, there is gold. And there is other minerals. So the considerations is that they want to have a control on Democratic Republic of Congo has the largest cobalt reserves, for example. Angola has very significant reserves of rare earths, and Algeria has very significant reserves of phosphates. So if you look at it strategically, an investment in energy in Africa opens the door to other investments that have to do with the resources that China will need in the future. And the infrastructure development that is happening is probably more linked to these other resources than to energy itself. Energy appears to be, yes, it's there, it's present, but it's not the issue. And it's not the issue because energy for China, energy comes from the Middle East and Russia. And that's the point of the Saudi Arabia-Iranian agreement and of the Syrian agreement. And there's another, Syria. Yeah, Syria, Iran, and Saudi Arabia, yes. So, to conclude, the approach does not consider credit risks, so they're after the resources. The impact of the countries is positive in some cases and in others. And the investments are happening not necessarily because of the energy, but because of what is being looked at forward with the other resources. That's my conclusion. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the presentation, Dr. Ugarteche. And as I told you before, questions and answers will be left to the end of all presentations. Next, I would like to introduce to Cesar Duarte's presentation, Cryptocurrency Competition, Nigeria and the Consolidation of the Naira, I suppose? Naira? Thanks so much.
Good afternoon. Thanks for the invitation. I'm going to talk about a little about this crypto project in Nigeria, and I will try to contextualize it in the current problems that the Nigerian economy is having. So, well, first, some definitions. The central bank digital currencies, that it's an alternative that has surged since the appearance of cryptocurrencies, and it's like a reaction from central banks to try to control this kind of instruments. And it's defined as a universally accessible electronic form of central bank money that can be exchanged in a decentralized manner known as peer-to-peer, meaning that transactions occur directly between the payer and the payee without the need for a central intermediary, right? So the difference between this central bank digital currency and what we usually know as electronic money or digital money is that there is no intermediary that needs to verify and authorize the transactions, right? So it's immediate. What are the advantages? The advantage is the reduction of transaction costs for individuals with little access to banking services. That it's a main point of central bank digital currencies, the financial inclusion. Most of the projects of central bank digital currencies don't require the user to have a bank account, right? The competition for private payment networks, that this could be seen as an advantage or a disadvantage, depending on where are you standing. The improvements in the transmission of monetary policy that allows the central bank to affect directly the financial conditions without the need to go to the banking system, right? So what we have seen in the last years is that the central bank sometimes tries to apply some kind of monetary policy, but the banking system doesn't follow them, and there is this transmission problem, right? So the central bank digital currency, it's supposed to solve this kind of problem, and it acts as a cash substitute that could result some countries transition to a cashless economy, right? So there are different approaches to CBDCs, and the relevant for this case is the retail CBDC, that it's when the users open their accounts directly with the central bank. So this allows ordinary people to make electronic payment using money issued by the central bank, or they could open deposit accounts directly in the central bank. So in a sense, the central bank functions as a commercial bank, right? So I open an account with my central bank, and I have my money there, and I can make payments, I can make transfers, etc., etc. It doesn't include all the financial services like like the credits, insurance and everything, but I have an account, an electronic account that can give me access to this financial world, and the money is not in a private entity, it's with a central bank, right? And it's supposed to include anonymity, right? The central bank would only be the user, but it supposedly doesn't know who is the real owner of this account, right? In case of some problems, some controversies, the security issues, it could access the information, but it's not required. I do not have to go to the central bank with my documents for us for the opening account, etc. I download an app, I may put some information there, and I have my account, right? There are several projects, iCorona in Sweden, the Petro in Venezuela, iPeso in Uruguay, Catcoin in Canada, and also in United States there is this project. In China, it's a very advanced project, right? So Nigeria developed its own CBDC, right? So it was presented in 21, the iNaira, right? So the iNaira is a CBDC backed by law, issued by the Central Bank of Nigeria as a legal tender. And it is the digital form of the Naira and is used just like cash, right? So in order to get the iNaira, I have to have an iNaira wallet that it's an app, right? So with this app, I can fund my wallet and then go to different merchants and make my purchases of commodities, of services, of goods, etc. It's a unit of account, it's a store of value, and it's a medium of exchange. What are the benefits? I can have diaspora payments, the government aids. It's going to be, well, they are being transferred directly from the government to individuals, right? You don't have an account, you don't have a bank, you don't need that. You just need to open your e-wallet, and the funds like the social benefits, etc., go directly from the government to your wallet, right? The transactions are faster, they are secure banking, and they guarantee transparency and an alternative to the financial system that in Nigeria it's an important issue because there isn't a lot of trust in the financial system, right? And it seeks financial inclusion. And the idea is that the digitization of money enhances the powers of the CBN, the Central Bank of Nigeria, to impact its monetary policy, what I was telling you about. How does it circulate? It circulates from individual to individual. I can make transfers from one wallet to another wallet, right? Like a common bank account transfer. It can also circulate from individual to business and merchants. I can do that via transfer, or I can do that via like something similar like this Apple Pay or Google Pay, or even use a QR code, right? So I can scan the QR code and the transfers goes. And I don't be individual to government. I can even pay taxes with this, right? So I can also make a transfer from cash or my bank account to the iNaira wallet, right? And I can make transfer from an iNaira wallet to a cash or a bank account, right? So it's supposed to be perfect circulation and perfect exchangeability between the iNaira and the Naira, right? In whatever form it takes. The wallet allows the user to hold money electronically, and it provides a deposit account that is directly with the Central Bank of Nigeria. How do I fund the wallet? I can make a direct transfer from a bank account, but that will require that I have a bank account, right? So that's one of the principal problems. So I can make a transfer from another wallet, receive a transfer, but I can also make cash payment through an agent or a bank. I can go to a bank that I don't have an account with that bank, but I can ask them to make a transfer of cash to my e-wallet, right? I just give my information of my e-wallet, I pay the cash, and I receive the transfer without having an account necessarily with that bank. Or I can even go to these agents that are allowed to do this kind of transaction, right? So one of the first issues that arise when this project was presented is, well, what happens with the financial institutions, right? Because in a way, the central bank is competing
with financial institutions for accounts, right? So what the central bank states is that it's not a competition. It's a complementary instrument for financial inclusion and to approach the population to financial institutions even. So what the central bank states is that this will imply new markets. This will open new markets, and it's open a market for digital currency users for financial institutions. Because the financial institutions, it's easier for them to approach a user that already has an e-wallet, and it's used to this kind of transactions, etc. It's easier for them to approach this and to provide services, to provide credit, to provide a bank account. There is also a customer synergy because financial institutions could act as bridges between customers and the CBN. If I already have a bank account, there is supposedly no necessity for me to close my bank account and just keep the Central Bank of Nigeria because they are complementary. But the main issue here is that there is a maximum daily cumulative limit. I have a limit for the use of this e-wallet. So that will make me jump to the bank account, to the financial institution, right? And the limit depends of either if I have a bank account or if I don't. If I don't, the limit is much smaller, right? So they narrow launch in 2021, and at the beginning it took some time to begin to be used, but at the beginning, well, in 1 year later, it was stated that it had already made 700,000 transactions, 92,000 downloads, and from that, the third part is active consumer wallet, and it's supposed to be minted 3 billion naira, and which 2.10 were issued by the financial institutions, through the financial institutions. So what happened at the beginning of this year, right? We have a cash crisis. President Mohamed Buhari launched the new Naira banknotes on November 23, 2022. They were supposed to be a replacement of paper notes to fight money laundering. This is in the context of high inflation rates, and where the central bank states that of 3.26 trillion currency circulating, 2.72 were out of the banking system, were cash, right? So this brings monetary policy issues, because if the Central Bank of Nigeria tried to impact the economy through the banking mechanism, well, it could do it, but there is a huge sector that doesn't reflect what happened in the banks, right? So they have to control all this cash. So what's the objective? The objective is reduce circulation to 1 trillion from 3.2 trillion in a couple of months, right? For a third part. From the basic rudiments of economics, once you have too much money in the hands of people, inflation goes up, but when the money is deposited in the bank, inflation reduces. This is a quote, it's not what I'm saying, right? So the cash crisis, it's also implied a redesigning of the Naira, and they are trying to, at the same time that they are trying to reduce the money in circulation, they are trying to promote a cashless economy and to promote banking, with the argument that this will curb insecurity and minimize hoarding of the Naira. And reportedly, from all the money that they are taking back, they are only printed only 500 billion, right? There was established a maximum weekly cash limit with withdrawal on December 2022, and what they were telling to the citizens is that they needed to go to the banks to deposit their cash and to open an account. There was no exchange of new banknotes for old banknotes. No, the old banknotes were retired, and they stayed in the bank. There is no exchange, right? This is the new banknote, and this is the consequence. Yeah, riot because the economy stopped, right? A cash economy that suddenly faces a sudden withdrawal of cash stops, right? And there are alternatives. They have the e-wallet, for example. they can use e-Naira, but people are not using e-Naira. Why? Well, although mobile banking transactions more than doubled between October and February, and the Nigerian economy is one of the that uses most electronic transactions, only 40% of Nigerians have a bank account number. In March, it was even established from the Supreme Court that all notes were to remain legal until the end of this year. In the original plan, they were going to remain legal until the end of March, right? And the estimated economic cost of the crisis is 20 trillion naira, right? The naira surged, the transaction surged during the crisis to 22 billion, but the active accounts represent less than 0.5% of the population. People with the smartphones are only between 25 and 40 million, that is 20 to 20% of the population, and there is a strong preference for cash transactions. The lack of cash crosses everything. This is a quote from a merchant in the market, right? The merchants are not willing to accept the naira. They prefer cash, they are used to cash, and you can legislate a change in behavior. The country's experience strongly suggests the average citizen understands that CBDCs present a substantial risk to financial freedom while providing no unique benefit. Why will I prefer an e-wallet over cash if I can make my transactions in cash? Cash is secure, cash is accepted, and cash doesn't imply a control from the government or from financial intermediaries, right? So the difficulty of monetary transactions goes beyond economic issues, and it has to do with political, with cultural, and with social aspects. And the Nigerian economy, based mainly on cash, cannot be forced to a short-term change. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Duarte, for the presentation. Now, let us move on to the next presentation. Dr. Gwendolyn Bravo will present el impacto del régimen de metas de la inflación para el desarrollo económico en países de economías emergentes, el caso sudafricano. And the last presentation will be, the last turn is for Dr. Andres Arauz, and that presentation is online, right? It's online. Okay, okay, thanks so much.
Bueno, buenas tardes a todos. Primero, agradecer a la doctora Girón por la invitación. A excepción de todos los ponentes, mi presentación pues será en español. Por lo mismo, trataré de hacerlo lo más claro posible para, como una cortesía a nuestros hablantes de habla inglesa, y gracias nuevamente por la invitación. El día de hoy yo preparé, me concentré pues en el tema específico de la inflación por derivado de este panel. Y voy a tratar de desarrollar rápidamente y de manera muy resumida ¿cómo decirlo? Una forma de política económica que es conocida en el mundo como el régimen de metas de inflación. Me voy a concentrar en algunos datos y en analizar este régimen para el caso de Sudáfrica. Primero, ¿qué entendemos teóricamente o de manera conceptual como un régimen de metas de inflación? Este es uno de los marcos operativos de política monetaria destinados a lograr la estabilidad de precios. Este es un concepto que nos da el Fondo Monetario Internacional, que básicamente es una recomendación que surge de estos organismos internacionales encabezados por el Fondo Monetario. Y entonces la estabilidad de precios se logra cuando los agentes económicos dejan de tener en cuenta las posibles variaciones futuras del nivel de precios al tomar sus decisiones económicas. Entonces, ¿qué nos está tratando o cuál se supone que debería de ser la meta a alcanzar con la aplicación de este régimen de metas de inflación? Es la estabilidad de precios, pero una de las teorías o las hipótesis que yo manejo en esta presentación es que no necesariamente el control de inflación y estrictamente a través de la tasa de interés implica un crecimiento económico, un desarrollo económico y una inversión para la región donde se aplica, ¿no? En este caso específico, en Sudáfrica. Este régimen tiene dos características principales. El Banco Central la primera es que el Banco Central actúa conforme a un mandato y a un compromiso de mantener una meta numérica exclusiva definida, como voy a presentar más adelante, como un nivel o un rango de inflación anual. La fijación de única meta de inflación subraya el hecho de la estabilización de precios. Insisto, este rango tiene como objetivo específicos el control estricto y la estabilización de los precios. Ahora, también este régimen implica un pronóstico de la inflación, es decir, esa meta se tiene que cumplir, pero también se maneja en torno a un pronóstico. Por eso también se le denomina o se le conoce también como un régimen de metas de pronóstico de inflación. Muchos de los bancos centrales donde se aplica este régimen efectivamente tienen un pronóstico numérico que fija ese pronóstico, ¿no? El Banco Central. Entonces, esta es una tabla sintetizada donde se muestran algunos países en los cuales se aplica el régimen de metas de inflación. Ahí están resaltados el caso de Sudáfrica y voy a hacer algunas comparaciones con el caso de México, donde también se aplica esta meta de inflación. En Sudáfrica se empezó a aplicar desde el año 2000. Tiene una meta numérica que es del 3 al 6%. Y tiene un proceso de pronóstico, es decir, sí se fija un pronóstico de la inflación y hay una publicación de parte del Banco Central sobre este pronóstico. Ahí hay otros casos, vemos varios casos de América Latina, está Brasil, Chile, Colombia, México, Perú, y también hay países que utilizo la denominación que viene dada por el fondo, que son países industriales, está Canadá, Reino Unido, etcétera, que son países que también han adoptado esta meta de inflación. Ahora, existen algunas características particulares en el caso de las economías emergentes que, de acuerdo con la literatura, vuelven o complican o hacen difícil la aplicación de las metas de inflación. El primero es las debilidad o que son consideradas como instituciones débiles, las instituciones fiscales. Lo mismo que las instituciones financieras, incluyendo la regulación y la supervisión por parte del gobierno de los mercados financieros. Hay poca credibilidad de las instituciones monetarias y muchos países de economías emergentes padecen de una sustitución de moneda y una dolarización de sus pasivos. Y una última característica es la vulnerabilidad de la salida de flujos de capitales. Entonces, a diferencia de muchas economías emergentes donde se aplican las metas de inflación, estas podrían ser consideradas características que vuelven complicada la aplicación en economías como Sudáfrica. Ahora, aquí traigo algunos datos. Empiezo con la tasa de interés, que vemos su comportamiento desde el año 2000, que es cuando se empieza a aplicar este régimen. Vemos un comportamiento relativamente que no muestra una tendencia, pero si nos fijamos después de la pandemia, que se empezaron a bajar las tasas de interés en el mundo para tratar de controlar la crisis que se estaba presentando, vemos que actualmente, al igual que muchas otras economías, incluidas México, tiene una tendencia al incremento de la tasa de interés. Ahora, el comportamiento mismo de la inflación, aquí lo vemos, lo traigo desde 1990, vemos, si nos enfocamos igual en el periodo actual, vemos que hay una tasa de inflación elevada como resultado, particularmente en el caso de Sudáfrica y de muchos países de África subsahariana, como una dinámica del incremento de los precios del petróleo, de los alimentos y de la dinámica de la invasión a Ucrania. insisto, derivado también del mismo proceso de crisis por la COVID y el proceso que se viene de tratar de estabilizar los precios. Aquí la tasa de crecimiento, como yo les comentaba, esta dinámica entre tasa de interés e inflación, si bien en algunos años, como se veía acá, se puede considerar que ha sido exitosa. ¿Por qué? Porque se cumple el objetivo de la meta de inflación, no necesariamente está ligada a un crecimiento económico. Entonces, algunos autores, y es parte de la hipótesis que yo estoy trabajando, es que efectivamente esta dinámica no necesariamente tiene un impacto positivo en la dinámica productiva de los países. Ahora, en el caso de la inversión, estrictamente la formación bruta de capital fijo, pues vemos cómo esta dinámica a partir de la crisis por el COVID, pues se viene desarrollando bastante de manera muy negativa, a pesar de que tuvo años exitosos o de crecimiento, perdón, no exitosos, de crecimiento durante los primeros años de los 2000. La misma dinámica de la crisis iniciada por la COVID, pues ha derivado en una caída en la inversión. Aquí les traigo un poco más desagregada, principalmente en 3 sectores, la inversión en Sudáfrica, es decir, inversión nacional, inversión privada, inversión del gobierno. Aquí no metí un actor que es fundamental, que son los actores internacionales, los que dan, como ya lo habían mencionado algunos ponentes anteriores, esa ayuda internacional, esa inversión que viene de fuera también es muy importante en el caso de los países africanos, incluido Sudáfrica, pero su dinámica, como pueden ver, la inversión está encabezada principalmente por la inversión privada, que bueno, no es como una sorpresa, ¿no? Ahora, ¿en qué se invierte principalmente? Esta es una metodología de la OCDE y donde más se ha invertido desde el año 2002 hasta el 20 es en recursos biológicos. Muy por debajo vemos que está la dinámica de la vivienda, equipo de transporte, edificios, estructura, en fin, digamos que la variable más dinámica es los recursos biológicos. Aquí hago una comparación solamente por lo que mencionaba al inicio, que en el caso de México también hay esta aplicación de las metas de inflación. Aquí esta variable es la dinámica que tiene el crédito otorgado al sector financiero, que vemos que es mucho mayor en el caso de Sudáfrica, y esto tiene que ver como una parte de la explicación por la dinámica también de sus grandes bancos panafricanos que tienen una presencia bastante importante en toda la región y que, bueno, a diferencia del caso mexicano, pues tienen hay un control mucho o estrictamente extranjero. Aquí vemos nuevamente una comparación entre la tasa de inflación de México y Sudáfrica, que bueno, si podemos ver en el caso de México, que es la línea roja, pues en los años 90 con la crisis que tuvo, pues se disparó y hay una diferencia importante con Sudáfrica, pero si vemos en los últimos años siguen una dinámica que se apega mucho a sus tasas a sus metas de inflación, que en el caso de México es 3 más menos 1, pero en los últimos años, derivado de esta crisis que inició con la COVID, pues la dinámica no ha podido ser detenida a pesar de la política monetaria que se está aplicando. Y bueno, aquí vemos también esta comparación con el PIB, que ambas caídas con la COVID ha sido bastante importante para ambas economías y que el proceso de recuperación pues parece ser bastante lento y de largo plazo, a pesar, insisto, de que esta aplicación de política monetaria que podría yo decir que se ha visto bastante rebasada por la situación en ambas economías para los casos que estoy presentando y analizando. Por mi parte es todo, muchísimas gracias y
Muchas gracias, doctora Gwendolyn Bravo. Thank you so much, Dr. Gwendolyn Bravo. And let us move on to the last presentation. The speaker, Andrés Arauz, is online. I would like to know if everything is ready. Can the doctor hear us? Sí, doctor Andrés Arauz. ¿Está ahí? Are you there? Let us know if you can hear us, please. Yeah, he's there. Yeah. Doctor Andrés. No, no está acabando. ¿Para qué le dan permiso? Okay. Okay. We have to put this last presentation on hold. We'll move on to questions and answers. And please, to all the attendees in this presentation, if you have questions that you would like to do to any of the speakers we had today, please have the kindness to give us our questions. Mhm. Mhm. Okay, questions? Yeah.
I would like to ask a question to
Yeah, can we get a microphone for the attendees and their questions? Thank you.
It worked now. I have a doesn't work and it works. Finally. I have a little question for Cesar. Well, I would like you to help me understand better this. I'm not economist. These dynamics of the cryptocurrencies, because if I understood your presentation, you concluded saying that there was like a big rejection from the part of the population to the adoption of this system of substitution of cash. But I would like to ask you a question from an anecdote from a friend, a French colleague that lived and studied in Brazil for a lot of time. Then he presented his doctoral thesis. He went back to France, and last year he came back to Brazil, and he told me that everywhere in Brazil they're using this system, and that even in the most poor areas of the cities in Rio de Janeiro, in the favelas, people are preferring this electronic way of transactions than the traditional cash transactions. So why is that difference in the acceptance from the part of society in Brazil, and why the rejection so clearly of the INAIA in Nigeria? I don't know if you can.
What do? We collect all questions and then the answers. Okay, so we collect all questions and then we move on to the to all speakers to answer the questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. It's similar to Dr. Gasquet's question. It's about the in area. Do you think it vulnerates local economies the use of the in-area, and that's why people is rejecting it, or is just if it actually vulnerates local economies, or is just the perception of the people. Thank you.
Well, in the same context about the Naira, the cryptocurrencies are generally accepted in many countries, but not by all the population. They are used for transaction in the businesses, inclusively in small and medium businesses and so on. And yes, I agree that the people that are sending some things on the street and so on may prefer cash, but I didn't understand in Nigeria why it is the governmental policy to substitute the cash by in-era. It is very interesting because in other countries they are functioning in parallel, the local currencies and the cryptocurrencies. So that would be my question. I don't know why the government must be so radical. And the other question, are similar experiences in other countries of Africa, or in Africa, the only case is in Nigeria?
Sorry, so cryptocurrency is popular. So let me add one more question. Probably just like a suggestion. So I think most questions are related to why people reject in Nigeria and why also government completely want to replace it. So Nigeria, for some reason, is notorious in terms of criminal activities. So partly the government wants to replace because they want to have a record of every transaction so they can catch. That's the hope. And for the same reason, the criminal groups, they don't want to be traced. They don't want to use the cryptocurrency because they want to avoid all the transactions. Even to the US, there are some criminal rings that are doing business, which definitely they don't want to use the inner. That's part of the but you mentioned a little bit also about the dysfunctional nature if you use that about monetary policy become less effective. So has not the government looked into this side effect, because this is very important. You are losing your monetary policy power if you don't have that control mechanism of reducing current money circulation or increasing money circulation whenever you want. Right? So, but let me move on from cryptocurrency and come to, I can't pronounce your name, but I can say Oscar. I can say Oscar. Sorry about that. But you're right, China is avoiding all the risk or taking the risk, political, economic, any risk. They take the risk to move there, but they are stuck now because they face those risks, right? Why do you think, is it really true that China did not see or did not want to, or just ignore the risk, or they have some other objectives that overcome those risks by saying, okay, I don't care about this, I have a major objective, partly because I'm competing with the US, so I better be there first, no matter what. Is that part of the explanation or what? Second question is, in your data analysis, you say since 2004, after China's arrival, some countries grew, some countries declined. In your data, did you relate that the decline in growth is partly because of arrival of China? What did they do to make the economy go down? Is there a direct relation, or is it totally something else? I know a lot of things move in Africa, so we cannot blame one thing, but this is surprising because the data, if you have the data, is there any link between China's arrival, economic growth decline? Can you blame, at least we are looking for something to blame China. So if you can link empirically that, then that would be nice. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much. Any other questions?
I was going to say about Duarte's presentation, there are two components to what you have presented. One is a cryptocurrency as a reserve currency. And the other one is the electronic payment system. And what appears to happen in Nigeria is they have joined both, which is unusual. That's not the usual way. You know, the usual way is what we have seen everywhere. You have electronic payment system, broadly used in Brazil, in Peru, in Argentina, China. They invented it. And the purpose of inventing it had to do initially with cashless society, but then after 2020, with a germ. Bills bring germs. And so in the poor areas, they preferred using the electronic payment system than using the bills. And it's very interesting. I tried to pay it. I was in Lima in 2021, and I took a taxi. And when I arrived at my nephew's house, I said, how much is it? And he said, 10, whatever. Gave 10, and he said, no, Yape. I said, what? Yape. Rang the bell of my nephew and said, I don't understand. He wants me 10 in Yape. I said, okay, Papa. And then the taxi left. And but it's just to bring the point on how the consciousness of the bills as vehicles of germs created the need for electronic payments. But Nigeria is famous for its for its mafias and electronic problems. So that's probably what's behind the riots, no? Now, in terms of what else happened, there seems to be more instability in Africa after 2005, or there's more political strife after 2005. I don't know why yet, but we were able to identify, I don't know how many countries, because the list has 39. And we are doing this matrix sort of thing and putting each country and trying to put a variable on top and putting an X to try to identify. So far, I would say what has hit the people has been the lack of growth. Now, why the lack of growth? I don't know yet. And what China has to do with the lack of growth, my hunch, and it's just a hunch, is that the lack of growth is because of the IMF policies. It's the same lack of growth that we have in Latin America, except that they started lower. So the expectations were higher, and you frustrate the expectations, people get violent. That's my impression, but I don't know.
Well, so you can hear me. Well, I think okay. Okay, I think the questions are related. Like you were saying, that there is this criminal factor that is very important. Like even when there was this forced change of all banknotes to new banknotes, there are reports that the ransoms were required in new banknotes, right? So there was this huge problem because you have to pay the ransom in new banknotes and you couldn't access new banknotes because they were scarce, right? So, but they prefer cash because of what you were saying. The other element is a monetary policy effectiveness, right? So if you have an economy that is mainly a cash economy, what you make with the interest rate, printing more money, etc., the impact of on the economic system as a whole is less, right? So the central bank is trying to improve its tools for the transmission mechanism through the banking system, right? So they can do that via banks, a bank account, like forcing people to open a bank account in exchange of the old banknotes, or they can do that through in naira, right? So I think that's why they are they were so rushed to implement this change, because of the context of high inflation, right? So they are trying to control high inflation that it's around 20%, it's expected to be 24% at the end of the year. So they need to implement a radical monetary policy strategy to make the function of their tools more effective. And why they have such difficulty for accepting this in IRA? Well, the criminal activities is a huge part, but I think also it's like making this huge leap from cash to completely electronic money, right? Because even in countries like ours, this change has been very gradual, right? So we started with the bank account, with the app, with the transfer. For example, here in Mexico, we are not used to make the electronic payment yet, right? We use the credit card, the debit card, etc. But we don't use our cell phone for pay. It's not very common, right? So it's still changing. And if you try to impose that kind of changes in an economy that is mainly cash, it's nearly impossible to do it in 3 months, right? Because you have also cultural resistances, right? So right here, a lot of people doesn't want to use electronic transfers because they don't trust them, right? I don't see the money, so maybe it doesn't go. I can lose my money. I don't like it. I don't like to use my cell phone to pay something because maybe it's fraud or whatever, right? So there is this cultural resistance for changing something that it's important, right? Because you can lose your money and you are not going to risk it just like that. So I think it's the crime factor, and there is this social cultural factor that are very important in a context where the government is trying to push it.
Are there any other questions? But I would like to drop a question to Dr. Alisa Giron and Dr. Oscar Ugarteche. Is the Chinese strategy sustainable in the long run? Because from both presentations, I understand the Chinese government is absorbing the losses, is absorbing those bad loans that cannot collect anymore. But I suppose that that Chinese strategy depends on the Chinese economy keeping up the rapid growth, I suppose. But in 20, 30, 40 years, is this strategy sustainable? And my other question would be, I'm sorry, I lost that. Why the Chinese money, whether investment or loans, doesn't promote growth in Africa? What's the component that doesn't promote it? And I think that's it for now. Thank you. Yeah, why the Chinese money doesn't promote growth in African countries? Why?
Okay, I will answer. Well, first of all, a strategical sustainable is the investment that China is making in Africa. Is it sustainable? I don't know. That's why when Antonina was talking about the green Chinese investment, of course, there are some. China, there's a report, but I just couldn't have time to read it. In the last week, they have a report of China, of how China has made very, very muy rápido, very soon, they are in the green economy. They are working in that, and we must learn about what China is doing. And of course, they have some project of green economy in the underdeveloped countries, and I think Antonina has explained it very well. My question is that China is an imperialist country. They are taking all the commodities that they need for the transformation in economy. They don't have, as you said, they don't mind if there is a democratic country or a dictatorial country. They don't mind of that. That's a real problem for the European Union. No, and the other thing is that they are growing. Also, we are having the GDP is accelerating in the countries, as you have shown. Of course, they are, but for me, it is very difficult. I have to go and see what's going there. Now, you have to see. We, of course, we were I was invited to put the cathedra in October. The coordinator sent me to Morocco, and what I saw there, I was impressed of the growth that they are having. Incredible. And it is not a democratic country. So the question is democratic functioning or is not functioning? I don't know. But they are growing and they have security. Then we went to El Cairo. I went with Vania. And what we saw there is that Emiratos Árabes and the Saudi Arabs and the Turkish are investing a lot of money. Maybe they will have a bubble in building, in construction very soon. You can imagine the construction that they are doing and how it is improving, and also the impact in the culture of Egypt, because Egypt was more Europe. And you can see now a lot of women with a black, how do you say, with a burqa. A lot of women, maybe the 10% of the women that we saw where we went, and most of them are Egyptian, but now the cultural, all these investments that are coming from the Saudi Arabia. So something is going there. And I think it was 5 years ago, I was in Johannesburg, and I was impressed by the Chinese investment. They have destroyed part of the economy because now they import a lot of all the manufacturers of Chinese, all the garbage of the Chinese manufacturer. And besides that, there are a lot of people living in the areas where there is where they used to have took uranium. There are many poor people living in those areas with radioactive countries. And so when you have you put the question is the Chinese has a strategy system? I don't know. Maybe we have to reconstruct what we understand by development. We have to redefine what is the democracy also. And well, so I have many questions doing that research.
Let's see, two things. First, I had not answered Jose Luis's question on why the Chinese enter. Why do they go? Because they want to be first? Because they don't want to be behind? I don't know. Strangely enough, for the US, Africa has never been a priority, never. And when it had some presence, it was in the Cold War period, basically selling weapons to one side to fight against the other. So now that we have a new Cold War, and it's clear that the US has provoked the new Cold War, that's clear as day. Maybe the US will again put weapons in Africa, I don't know. But for the Chinese, Africa, like South America, is a source of raw materials. And since risk is not taken into account, I suspect that they have a long-term project, because otherwise they would take risk into account. If they're going to lose money, you don't invest. But if you're going to lose money in the short term, in the next 10 years, but be assured of what was it, rare earths or cobalt or whatever, and peculiarly enough, gold. All of the countries have gold. The only one without gold is Algeria. All of the other 38 of the entire list have gold. Now that's peculiar. So they're looking into something forward-looking. Now, is this sustainable? Is life sustainable? I mean, it is sustainable as long as you keep breathing. As long as the economy, the Chinese economy, keeps on churning out rates of growth of 6 or 7%, it keeps on going. One thing that to me is clear is that we are at the end of what used to be called globalization. We are now in a fragmented globalization. And the fragmented globalization, strangely enough, has the West with protectionism led by the US, and which is very odd, and it has the East with not only economic growth and liberal policies, but it has a completely separate international financial architecture, which to me was news. They have a commodities market in Shanghai where they trade in yuans since 2020, oil, cereals, and metals. They have the payment system, the SIPs. They have the yuan being used as a reserve currency because of the US policy of not allowing some countries to use the dollar as a pressure, as a political pressure. So what they're doing is benefiting from what the West is doing, and the West is paying the price of those policies. So it's very peculiar. You have the world split in two, and China leading this Oriental globalization that keeps on going. It keeps expanding investment, it keeps expanding trade, it keeps expanding loans. And the last thing I put, well, I didn't present it, is a quote from a paper presented 2 weeks ago, a report 2 weeks ago, by a group called CARI. It's a Center for African Research at Johns Hopkins, I believe. And they have done research on Chinese participation in the debt reduction scheme from the pandemic. And they have found that China, being the largest creditor, has also been the largest reducer of debt and the largest negotiator of all of the debt restructurings. And it's been extremely cooperative, and it bears a weight of the total restructuring that is even much larger than their participation. So clearly, in this time of fragmented globalization, you have two things. You have, on the one hand, China leading the Eastern dynamics and with a long-run view, and something that is also new and that we're going to see in Africa, which is the Pax China. What they did with Saudi Arabia, between Saudi Arabia and Iran, is the beginning of a Pax of a new type. This is not a Pax Americana, it's not a Pax Britannica, this is a Pax China. And they have gone and said, we're going to agree, we are going to give you the security. So the military behind the agreement between those two parties is China. We are going to put the money for you both to recover, and we are going to have an agreement with you for you to supply us the oil. That is the beginning of a new age. And that happened last week. even if you consider that Biden had been there the previous week and failed, it is a surge of the Pax China, and it is, digamos, the culmination of this fragmentation process. And Africa is right in the center of that. That's the area where China has, I think, my impression so far is, they are controlling the area. And they are not controlling South America yet. We're trying to, but we have in South America, of course, the US, so it balances. And they don't enter the Caribbean basin, so nothing much happens here. But Africa, it's clear. And the Middle East, it's also clear. The world is splitting into two, and they're taking a chunk of it. And what's interesting is that the West is growing increasingly slowly. And it's losing its initiatives. And that's something new, I think. It's completely new. That's what's part of the new 21st century. Thank you.
Yeah, the discussion is sort of widening, but I'm coming back. I was thinking about, following your discussion on the currency issues and the digital currency, and the fact that we're talking about the BRICS. The BRICS have just proposed launching a new currency. You heard about it. That was like 1 week or 2 weeks ago. So that's the first challenge to American hegemonic power. The BRICS, I just saw the numbers. The GDP, the combined GDP of the BRICS for the first time in history is superseding the combined GDP of the G7. Okay, guys, that's never happened before. Of course, if you were to include in the G7, if Mexico and other economies, maybe wouldn't be, but anyway, they're very close. They're closing in. Basically, China, the BRICS are coming. The second new development, friends, the electronic payment system was, the Russians were taken out, you remember, of the SWIFT system. There are two companies, very small companies, controlling the SWIFT system in California, okay? It was very easy for the Americans to say to the Russians, you are out, with pressing a button, basically. Initially, Biden was victorious because he's done that. But actually, you've made a mistake because you're pushing the Russians to create their own financial system with the Chinese. So they're going to create their own financial space for electronic payments. They're going to create their own energy market. Remember, the day the Ukraine was invaded, on that same week, Putin opened the gas pipeline between Russia and China. Basically, my friends, they've been planning this. They're ready for any scenario. And Africa is part of the world strategy of controlling, of having access to natural resources. And I would include rare earths and oil, to be honest. And they're one step ahead in the South Pole and in the North Pole as well, because there are minerals and oil in the in the North Pole. They're challenging the Canadian Navy. China is already exploring, oil extraction, and everyone's doing it. But so basically, the pieces are moving. The chess is moving, and it looks quite complex to me. And the last thing I wanted to say is, everyone is going to Beijing, and nobody from Beijing is coming here. The only place that Xi Jinping has been to has been Moscow. And Lula has just been to Brazil. Macron has just been to China. Yeah, von der Leyen from the EU Commission. They are trying to save themselves. I've just read, Oscar, you can't imagine this. The Shanghai Swiss connection with the stock markets. There is a new initiative to connect the two stock markets. There is another initiative between Munich or Frankfurt to connect it to China because they're getting ready for the financial sanctions on semiconductors, on Wall Street. Wall Street is very worried because there's a new wave of sanctions on technology investments, on high-tech investment by American companies, by BlackRock and all these Vanguard and all of these people. They won't be able to invest anymore in Chinese companies. So the Europeans are getting ready for that possibility, and they're developing new financial agreements with China to make them, to allow them to. So it is really interesting, you know, the whole.
It's not the European, it's the Chinese.
Yeah.
They did the London Connect, they did the Hong Kong Connect.
Exactly.
Now they're going to have the Swiss Connect and the Frankfurt Connect.
But my suspicion is that they're predicting that more financial sanctions will come on Wall Street, and you won't be able to invest on ADRs. So they're launching the GDRs and the Swiss, and I don't understand anymore what's going on, because I would have thought that the Europeans would be backing the Americans. But now the Europeans are saying, well, you know, I have to make sure that my financial system is alive and profitable.
Did you read what Lagarde said 2 days ago? What she implies is that she spoke at the Council of Foreign Relations a couple of days ago, and she said, well, the Central Bank of Europe has normally followed roughly US policy, no? But we believe we now have to be more independent. And when you read that, you're understanding, and aha, okay, we're going to look the other side. We have to look at the other side, of course. I mean, because there are two major problems with the US right now. First, when they doubled the monetary base of the US in 2020, which produced this inflation we were looking at in the world, everybody was hit. Nobody was warned. And then there was this coordination at the Financial Stability Board, and all of them had to double their monetary base. Europe did it, Canada did it, Britain did it. And they turn around now and say, we have high inflation. Well, small wonder we have high inflation. That's one thing. The other thing is this on the monetary side, this is the other stuff. The other stuff is the US has not won a war since 1945. Now, that's a long time not to win a war. And the world has taken note that the US military is a business. It's a great business. It doesn't win wars, it makes wars. And what kind of support do you get in Africa if you're going to make a war and not win it? You're going to have a lot of dead people, a lot of destruction, lots of money being made for the recovery, no win. And China is playing the win game. They don't care about the dead. It's not their dead. So I think that the situation is very complicated because the US is playing from a weak position and from what it has lost that it had, which was technological clout. It lost its technological clout. I have been reading the 2005 UNCTAD report on research and development. In 2005, nobody thought China was going to become a technological head. No one. And here we are 15 years later. We are not 50 years later, 15 years later. Now we have all kinds of measures taken against China because they happen to make their own technology. Based on what? On what they learned from the technology that was taken there. So no, so the US has lost its technological clout. Its military might, we now know it's a business, it's not to win wars. And it manages its monetary base at will, creating world problems that the world has to pay for. And I have the impression that Chinese are not playing that game. They're saying, no, we're serious people, we invest where we invest, we produce what we produce, and we're going to defend the principles on which we do this. So now we have the world split into two, no? Sorry.
No, I think we will continue talking because really they have been very interesting. And of course, I agree that USA, they lost. La brújula, in English. They lost the compass, really, and especially Ursula and Janet Yellen when they decided to make these measures in front of the invasion. I think they lost, they were very crazy to put a lot of measures in front of Russia, and Russia immediately is with China. But this is before they are constructing another world. We are seeing right now, but they began many years ago. So we have to be careful and we must continue talking and see what's going. But it is, we have to finish because our colleagues that came from the other part from Boston and from Europe, and they are going to have a tour with Vania. They are waiting, the cars are waiting for you to see our murales. So, and then they will take, I don't know, Vania, if you want to say something, announcement. So, and thank you very much. We will see as soon as we have the videos in our web, we will send it to you, and then you will have another news from us.
Yes, thank you, Alicia. Just to say many thanks to all the participants, especially for our guests. I would also like to say thank you to UNAM Boston and all the entities and institutions back in Massachusetts who made international this colloquium. And hopefully we will see again in 2 years. You will find the brochure of the activity during the next days in our website, and we will also send it through email. And also during the next weeks, you will receive a call for working papers. So you can help us to make a first draft of your conference if you're interested in this. They will count on DOI, and also they will be peer reviewed, so you can they can count as publications. So regarding, yes, we have an scheduled tour to the Central Campus. Everyone is invited, not only the international visitors, and that will be all. Thank you very much.
Well, I would say thank you very much to the team at the PUEA who has worked a lot in your communications, to Vania, to Jose Luis Maya, who is here, and because it has been very difficult, here is Mitch, Gabby, who are in the nets, and also to Carmen, who it was terrible. She was assaulted when she was coming here to moderate the first word. She was assaulted inside of the campus. So it was we have a very difficult situation with her. And well, all the team, to Alma, who is our administrative chair, who make all the arrangements for you, and also to the CRI, who gives the money to pay the hotel for our speakers, and also to the coordination of Humanidades who make possible that Oscar will arrive with us. And thank you very much. And well, we hope to continue this seminar. We used to make these seminars. We invite you to see our webpage. It's PUEA, PUEAA .UNAM. There are all our activities. We are having 2 activities next week. We are a little crazy. We are having a Korea seminar next. It will begin on Monday, and it's on Monday, right? Or on Tuesday. Well, it's in the. And then we are having the Moroccan with Morocco. We are having an activity. It is going to be very interesting. We are going to have 2 sessions of economy, and there's coming a minister from Morocco, and there are some also our Mexican ambassador in Morocco is arriving also, and there will be the Mohammed V University with us, and also other universities of Morocco, Tetuan and Tanger University, and Al Jabir. So for us, it's very difficult to pronounce the Arabic. And what else? And we invite you to see our report. It will be the second report of the PUEA. That is going to be the May 3rd at 11 o'clock in the Coordination of Humanities. It is going to be present, but at the same time, you can see it by the web. Yes.
I have a last invitation, and it's for Spanish speakers, so I will do it in Spanish. Estamos teniendo por primera vez la convocatoria al Premio Anual de Investigación en Estudios sobre África. Entonces, los invitamos a participar. Hay premios para tesis de licenciatura, maestría y doctorado que hayan sido publicadas el año pasado.
Presentadas.
Perdón, sí, presentadas el año pasado. Entonces, la convocatoria está en el PUEA, está ahorita abierta y está abierta hasta el 25 de mayo. Entonces, es una convocatoria que nace a raíz de una iniciativa del PUEA. Participa la Facultad de Ciencias Políticas, la Facultad de Filosofía y Letras, el Instituto Matías Romero, el Colegio de México, y espero no estarme saltando a nadie. Y bueno, además del reconocimiento
Matías,
de la...
Sí, Matías Romero, sí, ya lo dijiste.
Y la publicación, hay un premio económico. Muchas gracias.
No,
¿Es solo abierto para alumnos de la UNAM?
No, es abierta para hispanohablantes.
Hispanohablantes, o sea,
Ujú.
cualquier tesis de alguna universidad. O sea, si la tesis está escrita en español, entra al concurso, independientemente de que venga de Japón, pero si está escrita o traducida del japonés al español, sí se vale, ¿no? Pero tiene que haber pasado el grado de licenciatura, maestría y doctorado. Y quizás no es mucho dinero, pero para la tesis de doctorado son 50,000 pesos. Y
Son 45 para doctorado y la publicación en la colección universitaria de estudios sobre Asia y África. Para maestría son 30 y para la licenciatura son 15.
Y las 3 se van a publicar, ¿verdad?
La de doctorado.
Solo la del doctorado se publica en la colección de estudios sobre Asia y África que tiene el PUEA. Entonces, pues ojalá nos puedan hacer propaganda con sus estudiantes y además que los inviten ahora a hacer tesis del África. Muy bien. Bueno, pues muchísimas gracias y bueno, pues están en su casa. Okay, let's go.